RoofMan, played by Channing Tatum, he plays Jeffrey Manchester, a struggling U.S. veteran who is trying to provide for his children. And somewhere along the line, his friend Steve, who's also served in the military with him, lets him know about his great power of observation. So then Jeffrey decides to use this observation skill to notice certain details in McDonald's and how he can go about robbing them. Now, I do remember this story being broadcast in the news at some point in the 90s when I was a little bit younger, when I was a kid. But, when you're a kid, you don't really pay attention to detail like that. And I didn't know exactly the history behind what was going on with Jeffrey. I didn't know that he robbed that many McDonald's. Apparently it was around 41 McDonald's or something like that. And this was going on for a while now, within, the early 2000s until he was finally caught. And, it's a real sad story because, it is true, and Jeffrey Manchester is currently still incarcerated and locked up as we speak today. And it's sad because on one side of things, it's like he really was a good guy. And when you interview the people that he actually became encountered with as he was doing these robins, they would tell you, like Jeffrey Manchester, he locked us in the freezer, but he would have us wear our coats. He was really nice and polite about how he was going about robbing the store, which is very strange for a common thief to be kind and polite to you. But the reality of it is he was really a nice guy, is only that he made really bad decisions. So Channing Tatum is playing the story of Jeffrey Manchester as he robbed a long line of McDonald's. And then at some point as he's doing this, he eventually gets caught only to escape and then hide into a Toys R Us for about a couple months or so. And the reality of it is this story is actually very funny. It's very entertaining, but it also has heart where it matters the most. At some point, Jeffrey Manchester, he decides to create a whole new identity for himself. He meets new people, he starts new relationships, only to eventually get caught and then get sent back to prison once more for the final time of the story. And this story really humanizes Jeffrey. It shows that he really is just a guy and he wants his family, he wants to be with his family. He's just making a lot of bad decisions, and you can't expect to rob a long line of, fast food stores and think that you're not going to get caught, especially when your steps and your movements, basically become predictable. He's just a guy, he's trying to be with his family. He's just making a lot of bad decisions. And, within this movie is showing you exactly how Jeffrey was able to survive living in the Toys R Us for as long as he did. He, was doing things like, taking candy, and he was eating M&Ms. He was eating baby food, and he would take showers in the male's bathroom and with the sink, So it really just kind of shows you exactly how he was able to get around and survive within this Toys R Us for so long. I'm pretty sure, at this time, now that, things have changed, times have changed, technology have changed, I don't think that's something he'd be able to do within this day and age. But back then, things was different. And I'm sure back then, you kind of wonder, like, how could nobody have noticed this guy living within this Toys R Us for so long? But I'm pretty sure that even the police department, for them, this was kind of like a situation that was uncommon. How many people would rob a fast food establishment and then go and hide in the Toys R Us, and in certain areas you wouldn't even dare to look at. And the supporting cast was great as well. You had Kristen Dunst, Peter Dinklage, and Lakeith Stanfield. And Kristen Dunst played the actual love interest, who actually meets Jeffrey at some point in a church, and actually, introduces him to her family. And this actually starts him with a new family that he becomes encountered with and starts to, being favored with. And I think it really is a heartfelt story, and it really is sad to see him, actually go out the way he did. But the fact of the matter is, what he was doing was a crime. Given reason or not that it was, for a good purpose, it was still bad the way he was going about it. And I think this movie really was great. Given what it was, if you want to know more about the RoofMan and, the way he would actually go about how, he would rob these establishments, I think the movie shows it, pretty well. It basically is straightforward and lets you see exactly how he was going about, handling this situation. Jeffrey Manchester is currently in prison today, and he was able to talk to Channing Tatum and actually give him his input on everything and let him know, step by step of his feelings and thoughts about, what was going on, and, basically give him the rundown of how he should go about playing his character. So, Channing Tatum did speak to Jeffrey Manchester in prison, and, they did interview a lot of the security guards and policemen that actually did apprehend Jeffrey Manchester, and, they did ask them a couple questions, and the police officers did tell them, like, this exactly how it went down. So, this story is, fairly true to what was going on in the real world, and I think that a lot of people will enjoy it just to see, you know, the way that this was being handled. And again, this movie is just a comedy, but I think the jokes really land where you see Jeffrey trying to escape law enforcement. There wasn't really like jokes as in, you know, him telling jokes. It was just really just him trying to evade the law and trying to get away and, you know, stay unnoticed. And, you know, the way he was trying to not be caught in this situation, this was really where the core humor came into the movie. You know, watching Jeffrey trying to survive in the Toys R Us, watching him trying to find things to eat, watching him trying to find things to wear, the humor came in trying to see him survive, where he was just trying to find things to eat within the Toys R Us, how he would eat the baby food, how he would eat the candy, how he would evade law enforcement, you know, the things he would wear. He would find, you know, women's clothes to wear. He would find kids' clothes to wear. And he was basically using the Toys R Us as his own personal motel. Jeffrey would even then take games out of Toys R Us and then try to sell them to make a little money. And I think that was, you know, interesting. I think it was funny to see him do that and how he was using that to survive. I mean, eventually, you know, the co-workers in Toys R Us realizes that there's a lot of missing stock, and they realizes that things are getting kind of low within their establishment, and they start to become suspicious, and eventually they realize that somebody's been living within the Toys R Us. It's funny how some of the best movies that are told in life are those that come from an actual true story. I mean, you don't really have to write much of a script when the script is already written for you. You know, you already have the person that's still alive able to tell the story, and I think they really did a great job actually giving the details and tell the story about how this man was able to get away with robbing this long line of establishments of fast food restaurants and eventually, you know, get caught. I think this movie is a really interesting movie. It reminds me of Tag, that movie that had those guys that were going around playing tag for a bunch of years, and they eventually made a movie about this and how they was able to play tag throughout their whole life and still remain friends, and that's actually a true story. Look it up. But I think this does pretty much what that movie did. It basically shines light on something that a lot of people didn't really know was going on back in the late 90s to the early 2000s. A lot of people didn't really even know the history behind this guy, Jeffrey Manchester. And it's great to see that, you know, they're able to take that story and actually bring it to the big screen and make something interesting and fun out of it, you know, because the realization of it is what he did actually was kind of funny. You know, you got this guy who's a robber and he's robbing this establishment, but he's also a good guy, you know, because he's nice, he's kind, he's not hurting anybody, he's not trying to hurt anybody, you should say. And I think this movie was interesting to watch. I think it's a nice watch if you wanted to go out and see something. I would give this movie like somewhere between a 6, just because of the humor behind it and just because of the entertainment factor behind it. I think Channing Tatum did a great job. I think Kristen Dunst, you know, as the love interest, Leia Wainscott, also did a great job in her role. I mean, it was fun to watch, and it is a fun movie, and I think you guys will enjoy it a lot. So what do you guys think? Did you see RoofMan? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Let me know in the comments. Please like and subscribe to this video, as it will help the channel grow. And remember, everybody, it isn't cinema if it ain't absolute cinema. Till next time, take care.